Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
I have a question for you. For those that don't understand what Zionism is, can you give them a little bit of a...
Sure, I think I can encapsulate what Zionism is. It's an ideology begun back in the latter half of the 1800s, so the 19th century, by a man named Theodor Herzl. I believe he began it in Switzerland, and indeed there was great persecution of common Jews in Europe and Russia. I separate those common Jews from the oligarchs, the rich Jewish Rothschilds and people like that, who have always pulled the financial strings. But certainly the pogroms that Russia and other countries placed on the Jewish people were terrible. And the ultimate horror was the Holocaust undertaken by Adolf Hitler in World War II. Of course, the Holocaust in World War II was well before the beginning of Zionism. So at any rate, Herzl began Zionism. He published his little booklet called Judenstaat, I believe it is, the Jewish state. And it took off from there. Zionism was seen in those days as a sort of a social saving factor for the Jewish people. They weaseled their way into governmental functions, and therefore in 1917 we had the Balfour Declaration out of England, in which the Foreign Minister of England, Balfour, signed a paper in which he said the Jews are entitled to a homeland in Palestine. At that time, of course, Palestine was under mandate, colonial mandate, to Britain after the breakup of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. So Britain acted as the colonial overlord, and Balfour put the seal of approval of the British government via his declaration to permit the Jews to influx into Palestine. Before the 1920s, the people of Palestine were Jewish, Christian, and majority Muslim, but they all lived in peace and harmony. It was basically an agrarian society, and it was the influx of European Ashkenazi Jews from Northern Europe which created the divisions in Palestine, which are just wide open and bleeding today. Zionism then, of course, capitalized on the Holocaust to play on the guilt of the Western world, and that's why the West, via the fledgling United Nations in 1947, goosed by Zionism, awarded 54% of Palestine via Resolution 181, 54% of the Palestinian land, homeland, to the Jews as the state which became Israel in 1948. And a paltry, therefore, because the Muslims were still, the Palestinians were still the majority population, 46% was allotted to the Palestinian Arabs. And I'm sorry, but any fool, anyone who would not reject such a resolution would be a fool. And the Palestinians aren't fools, so they and their Arab neighbors, their Arab brothers, said, no, we don't accept such a resolution. And therefore war broke out. The Zionists were massively armed by Czechoslovakia. They stole goods out of the United States excess stockages out of World War II. And the Jews just rolled over the Palestinians, dispossessing 750 to 800,000 of them across the border into Lebanon, Jordan, herded elsewhere, and those refugees are still living in squalid refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, There were some in Iraq. They've been persecuted in Iraq after our invasion of Iraq. Many in Jordan. I think 75% of the population of Jordan is of Palestinian background. There are also, of course, internally displaced refugees right within the illegally occupied Palestinian territories in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and especially in Gaza. Over half of the population of Gaza, which was massacred by Israel last December and January, they're refugees to start with. Now they're refugeed again. They're not living in their second or third refugee status home. Now they're living in tents, and they can't get construction materials into Gaza to begin to rebuild their homes and their infrastructure. Their sewage is a disaster. Millions of gallons of raw sewage are being spilled into the Mediterranean every day because Zionist Israel will not allow the piping and machinery to rehabilitate the Gaza sewage system. Water is in peril. Israel will not allow the purification materials and building materials to try to keep the Gaza water in some state of repair. It's saline now. It's very dangerous for kids to drink. It's, of course, dangerous for agriculture. Because of this blockade, the Palestinians have been forced to resort to digging tunnels between Gaza and Egypt to bring in life-giving, even cattle they bring through those tunnels, and other supplies that are necessary to live. And that leads to another point. Egypt now, via my tax dollars and via the bureaucracy of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, is busily constructing a 57, I believe it is, 57-foot underground barrier, an impenetrable steel barrier of modern construction materials that will prohibit the miserable Gazans from even accessing humanitarian supplies via tunnels. So they're cut off from Israel, they're blockaded from the sea. Israel shoots Palestinian fishing boats. The skies belong to Israel. So Gaza is still an occupied territory by Israel, and Israel, by international law, should be taking care of the humanitarian needs of Gaza. And that is a tragic, sadistic joke, because Israel does not take any humanitarian care of the Gazan people. It turns out that I and other people, Jesse and everyone else, must take out of our pockets charity money to give to the Gazans so that they can have anything in the way of material help. That's an abomination in my considered opinion.